Hello everybody and welcome along to a brand new video where today I'm going to be taking a look back at another classic Doctor Who serial way back from 1967 once again. It is the Moonbase. So yes, this is Patrick Troughton's fifth story as the Doctor, as the second Doctor, facing off against the Cybermen for the first time for his particular incarnation, but the second story to feature the Cybermen and returning only 5 or 6 episodes after the previous one. So it was a very sort of a quick turnaround, realising that actually these are a great idea. These creatures that have no emotions are used to be humans, have been sort of upgraded and everything like that. This whole idea was sort of really caught on and they wanted to kind of come straight back in and do a sort of another story around the Cybermen. And I think this one works really effectively. So yes, of course, hence the title, it's based on the moon. There's a moon base where they could essentially control the Earth's weather from in 2070, so we're quite a long way into the future. Certainly bear in mind from this point of view, it's over 100 years in the future. 103 years after this episode aired, whereas now obviously it's only 50 years or so. It's kind of crazy to think that we'll obviously at some point get to the point where this episode that aired 103 years earlier will actually be set, sort of the time that it was set will actually be the current time. And hopefully I'll be allowed to see that. So that'll be it's one of those weird, funny Doctor Who things that you get. So I think we've just hit the Enemy of the World, I think was originally set in 2018. As well, and obviously that aired in 1968, so it's just these sort of, yes, funny kind of years and years and years ago, kind of seeing what they predicted these 150 or 100 years in the future was going to be like, and then seeing it, what it's actually like when we get to those years. But yes, so we had this set on the moon, the Doctor and co obviously stumbling across it, as always, getting into scrapes and whatnot, and people are sort of passing out. You've got the classic Doctor Who idea of a sort of a virus on some sort of base station that's gradually taking different people out, and you're trying to work out what's causing this virus, why is it only killing certain people and things like that. Obviously this story as a whole is very much the sort of classic base under siege story, which is of course very, very popular across Patrick Troughton's era. Almost Troughton's era is the era of the base under siege story, and this is very much another one of those. But that's certainly not a bad thing for it at all. It very much is still a very strong story, but it does use a very, even at this point, a fairly well-defined formula, I think it's fair to say. In terms of the Cybermen in this story, I think that they maybe at times were kind of not on screen enough. It did feel like it took a long time to kind of introduce them into the story. Of course, you see one briefly at the end of episode 1 as the cliffhanger, and then we pretty much don't see it again for episode 2, and then briefly again at the end of episode 2 as the cliffhanger to that. So he's almost trying to like introduce the Cybermen twice in those first 2 cliffhangers, and then they're just kind of not really a part of any of the other episode 1 and episode 2, just some sort of close-ups, over the shoulder shots showing an arm, a hand or something like that. And it's kind of just, you kind of, when it's only a 4-part story, you want to kind of get to the main bit, which is seeing the Cybermen a bit earlier on. And so I think that was maybe a little bit of a shame, and I feel like maybe earlier in episode 2 they should have kind of made themselves more of the big threat at that point, rather than waiting until essentially episode 3 to really be involved in the story. Though certainly once they did turn up, that's, I think, feel like where the story just really kind of continues to kick on a bit, and certainly the Cybermen are quite a sort of force and a presence. Even if there's only 2 of them to start off with, they do still kind of walk in and take complete control of the base, essentially, and kind of command the humans what to do. Quite sort of clever ideas of trying to kind of take control of the various humans by sort of giving them the virus, then kidnapping them, implanting them with these sort of devices on their heads, which means the Cybermen can control them. Is a really clever idea. Of course, we see it used lots of times in the future as well with the Cybermen, but setting that out as an idea from very, very early on is really clever, and just sort of allows them to infiltrate and take even more control, I think, which is a sort of a great idea to use with the Cybermen. Though I have to say, the one thing with the Cybermen that I did find a little bit difficult was the voices. The voices are really good, and I do really like that kind of very sort of electronic, almost computer-generated voice, it almost sounds like, to a degree. I think that the problem with that is it just at times quite difficult to understand what they're saying, because it's so kind of muffled and electronic-y sounding. So I did end up kind of having the subtitles on for most of episode 3 and 4, just because I was a little bit struggling to understand exactly what they were saying. But it still very much sort of fits with the Cybermen, I think, and is a very good voice for them. It just maybe lacked a little bit of clarity at times, I think, which made it a sort of a little bit difficult in moments. But it also seemed like the Cybermen in this story almost had a little bit of sass. They were almost a little bit kind of, it felt like, although they're meant to be emotionless and have no feelings, it almost felt like they had them to a little bit at times, when they were sort of talking about your silly human brains, and if you make the stupid decision of doing this and stuff like that. They were just like kind of throwing digs at the humans of being stupid and stuff, and I just thought I don't know if it felt out of character for the Cybermen. It was just like, I don't really remember seeing that from many other Cybermen stories, and so I just thought it was almost quite funny the way the Cybermen just chucking out these little sort of sassy lines at the humans, saying how stupid they think they are and things like that. It just kind of, yeah, I feel like you don't always see that with the Cybermen, so I really quite enjoyed that. It was just kind of a funny moment in episode 3 in particular. I think in some ways it was a little bit unfortunate the Cybermen were, well, in episode 3, so easily defeated by those various different sort of plastic dissolving liquids that Polly came up with the idea of using to sort of essentially destroy the chest plate in the Cybermen, and they will just die. That felt a little bit of a easy cop-out. Of course, I know from future Cybermen stories of the whole gold destroying them, which is, again, to a degree, it's just having to give the Cybermen some sort of Achilles heel and way of removing them from the story at some point because we need to defeat them. But it did feel like a little bit of a cheap, easy way of doing it, that kind of feels like these sort of almost invincible Cybermen can be defeated by some liquid in a little squirty bottle. Yeah, that felt a little bit maybe lacking, but it did give Polly a good sort of opportunity in this story. I think she was a lot better than what she got in the Underwater Menace, the previous story, where she was actually a lot more involved in the story. She sort of almost had those kind of scientific moments, coming up with the whole idea of the dissolving the plastic on the front of the Cybermen and everything was really really good to see them kind of putting that into her as a character. And I think, yeah, so that just kind of gave her a bit more to do and a better impression in this story, I think. Whereas with Jamie, I think it's pretty clear to see that he was not really written into this story when the script was originally written. It was clearly written for Ben and Polly, and they'd just given Jamie a few of Ben's lines and obviously given him the virus and knocked him out for 2 or 3 episodes. So he very much has virtually nothing to do in this story and really isn't much of a part of it. But as I was watching the making of documentary, Fraser Hines was pretty happy to get paid to just lie in a bed and do basically nothing for 4 weeks. So he was happily taking that, which I thought was just quite a sort of funny comment to make. But yes, it's very clear that this story really isn't made for 3 companions. It's very much just for Ben and Polly. And I think it's also noticeable the Doctor's performance in this episode, Patrick Troughton's performance. I thought it was he almost, earlier on he seems to have quite a lot to do, but I felt like in episode 3 in particular he almost wasn't that involved in the story. Like the Cybermen had come in and taken control and were like the leading characters of episode 3 in particular, and a bit of episode 4, and all the sort of scientists and people involved around in the Moonbase. It felt like they were taking a lot of the lead of everything in particular episode 3, as I say, and a bit of episode 4. And I don't know, it just felt like that Patrick was just kind of taking a back seat for some of this story. Maybe that was probably just how the script was written. I watched in the documentary, the director kind of was quite hard on Patrick, making sure he wasn't messing around and being a bit silly at times, which I think he did a lot of. And so I think it kind of forced Patrick to kind of rein in his performance a little bit. And I think it does show in this story, because he isn't certainly if you compare it to the Underwater Menace, for example, he's nowhere near as silly and comedic and doing lots of different voices and dressing up as different people and whatnot and things like that he didn't, particularly in the Underwater Menace and the Highlanders. That's all gone from this story, and he's very much playing it sort of dead straight, dead serious. But also I think, yeah, it sort of means that he takes a bit of a back seat in some of this story and just sort of lets some of the other characters do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It was just kind of, yeah, an observation that I noticed particularly in episode 3. Ultimately, it feels like the Cybermen were maybe a little bit easily defeated by pointing the sort of weather machine at them, and I think maybe I got confused, but it seemed like they kind of blew the sort of, maybe created wind from this machine, or the sort of power of it, and just kind of blew them all up into the sort of void of space, essentially. And that was, it looked reasonably effective, with them all kind of being lifted up into the sky and the spaceship flying up into the sky and everything like that. But after they'd all sort of turned up, it just felt a little bit sort of not necessarily a disappointment, but a little bit unspectacular of a way for them to go. Though I do think they had some absolutely fantastic moments in this story, particularly at the end of episode 3 and the start of episode 4, where they have this, it's the time for the Cybermen invasion, and they're all walking out of their spaceship, walking towards the moon base, and we see this sort of these sort of wide shots across on the moon's sort of surface of these 11, I counted it, 11 Cybermen. They managed to create 11 Cybermen costumes, which I thought was quite impressive compared to Dalek stories where you usually get 4 or 5 Daleks. To have 11 Cybermen walking around across the moon, it really did look so spectacular, like they were a proper sort of a real force, a real army that are going to come and try and take over this moon base. Obviously, they never actually made it to the moon base, really, or we didn't see them in the moon base again, I don't think, really, in episode 4. But yes, just seeing them out on the moon, which looked quite effective as well, I think. For sets on Doctor Who, it was one of the better ones, definitely. It did give the vibe of more of the moon than of a set, I think, which is a good feat for Doctor Who to be able to do. And yeah, I feel like they are those just quite iconic sort of scenes of the Cybermen walking across the moon's surface. The animation at the end of episode 3 looked really, really effective with those as well. I did think in particular the Cybermen were really, really well animated in of course I was watching the animated reconstruction of it for episodes 1 and 3. And yes, the Cybermen in particular looked fantastic, I thought, in the reconstruction. That was really, really well done. And I thought it was definitely one of the good animations to go with this story. I think sometimes it does help sometimes which episodes are missing and which episodes are existing. In some ways I would have liked to see episode 3 existing, because episode 3 has got a lot of Cybermen action with the 2 Cybermen coming inside the base and kind of trying to take over and everything, and that's obviously all animated. But I think it's sort of a hats off to them for doing a really good job of it, and it shows because it does still really, really engage you even though it's all animation. Seeing these Cybermen like that and sort of in the base and everything, it all works very, very effectively. So I think this is definitely one of the stronger outings for these sort of animations like the Doctor Who, and combining the 2 animated with the 2 existing episodes, I think it creates a really fantastic sort of whole package. And so yes, overall this is a story I did quite enjoy. I'd never seen it before, never even barely seen any clips of it or really knew anything about it as a story, but I did quite enjoy it. I thought it was a reasonably good story. I thought the Cybermen were very well sort of brought back in this story. I think the costumes in the 10th Planet are really, really good, but I can kind of see the practical problems with them, and so that's why it they had to make that change for this story. And I think they do still work quite effectively, even if they aren't quite the same. They're certainly very different to what we had in the 10th Planet, but I do still think they give that really sort of strong, creepy effect of these kind of people. They used to be people, and now they're these sort of mechanical foes with this sort of straight face and no mouth, the sort of straight mouth, the dark eyes where there's no sort of eyeball or anything like that. I think that's all really, really effective. And yeah, it just creates overall a really, really enjoyable story. I think it's probably not the best Cybermen story ever. I'd put Tomb of the Cybermen above it, probably The Invasion as well, some of the new series stories as well and things like that. Maybe probably Earthshock as well. But it is still very, very good, and kind of I think does a good job of kind of setting out the Cybermen as a proper nemesis to the Doctor by bringing them back and showing them as a big threat, even if they are ultimately defeated. Because of course I think is it 4 more times they turn up again, or was it 3 more? I think it's 3 times more, because it's Tomb of the Cybermen, The Wheel in Space, and The Invasion. So there's 4 stories Patrick Troughton faces off against the Cybermen, which is sort of the Cybermen were Patrick Troughton's nemesis, where the Daleks were for the first Doctor, William Hartnell, of course, then it's the Cybermen for Patrick Troughton's Doctor, then it feels like it's the Master or Roger Delgado's Master for the 3rd Doctor. And then, well, Tom's there for so long that he has many arch nemesis, but I think, yes, the Cybermen are very much the one for the 2nd Doctor, and this is where it's really set out to start off with. But what about you guys? What did you think of this story? I really enjoyed it, but I'd love to hear what you guys, just any general thoughts you've got in this story, do let me know down in the comments below. But other than that, guys, do remember to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very, very soon for another review. Goodbye!